Well, in a jury trial, there are two elements. There's the judge and the jury. As I've said, the jury hears the evidence, the jury decides the case, the jury brings in the verdict, guilty or not guilty. The role of the judge is quite different. The role of the judge is first to ensure that the trial is conducted in accordance with law and fairly. Second, to give the jury some directions of the law relevant to the case, and we'll come to that in the next session. And the judge then controls the procedure, but the jury decides guilt or innocence. So they're different functions. The judge doesn't decide the facts, the jury decides the facts. The jury doesn't decide the law, the judge gives them directions of law which the jury then applies. For murder, you've got to prove a number of elements, and the judge defines those elements for the jury. But the jury makes the decision. So they're complementary functions, they're different. Of course, in the lower court with the magistrate sits as both a judge and a jury because there's no actual physical jury in the court. So at the end of a jury trial, if a jury convicts an accused person in a criminal court, then the judge, not the jury, imposes sentence. Again, the parties make their submissions, but they make them now to the judge. The prosecution emphasises the worst aspects of the offence, that it was premeditated, that it involved stalking, that it involved gratuitous violence, that the accused has prior convictions, and so on. The defence tries to put mitigating factors, that there was no premeditation, that there are no prior convictions, that the accused had a blighted childhood and was herself or himself the subject of abuse, that there are good prospects for reformation. Now, there are some critical elements of sentencing because it's much misunderstood in the media and in the community. First, the sentence should be proportionate to the offence. Obviously, if you've got a murder case, you'll have a very heavy sentence. If you've got, say, shoplifting, you'll have a much lighter sentence. So it has to be proportionate, in the ballpark, if you like, for the offence. But then there are a number of elements when a judge decides upon a sentence. The first is punishment. Sounds a very old-fashioned, Old Testament word, but punishment is a legitimate element in sentencing. Obviously, the more serious the crime, the more the element of punishment applies. For example, in what I just said, with murder you'll have a significant element of punishment. In shoplifting you'd have a much lesser element of punishment. A second element is condemnation or denunciation, that it is an important part of the sentencing function to condemn and denounce evil conduct. This is particularly relevant in sexual offence cases. It's relevant in those string of cases coming before the courts of abuse of children by clergy and other persons in authority. Denunciation and condemnation of that is very important. But a critical element in sentencing is deterrence, to deter the person from doing it again and to deter other like-minded people from taking the same course. So deterrence is part of sentencing as well. Deterring the individual in front of you is called specific deterrence. Deterring other like-minded people from doing the same thing is called general deterrence. And all those elements, as you can see, point one way, towards a heavier sentence. On the other side, reformation and rehabilitation is a very important part of sentencing. Particularly important with younger offenders, and especially important with people who have had a blighted upbringing and need assistance. So, depending upon the age of the person in front of you and the type of the crime and the history of the offender, it may be that you get a very heavy sentence because the person has numerous convictions, has a premeditated serious offence and is older, or it may be a much lighter sentence because the person is young and ought to be given the chance for reform and rehabilitation. And so these elements, as you can see, pull each way. The punishment, denunciation, deterrence pulls one way, reformation and rehabilitation pulls the other. And you'll get in the newspapers often, they'll run one side of the argument or the other. But in truth, as you know, there are often two sides, and the judge has to determine in the end what the right sentence is, bearing those competing factors in mind.